As we climbed into the car, I offered a reassuring smile. "She'll be fine," I said, fastening my seatbelt. We sat in quiet observation, me scanning the chaotic parking lot, her staring through the windshield, lost in thought. Reversing out wasn't an option just yet. The small lot was a jumble of vehicles, flustered parents, nervous college students, and an assortment of luggage, suitcases, posters, kettles, and, here and there, a few neglected books. I thought her room had potential, I mused, breaking the silence. Once she adds her own touch, it'll feel like home. And that little ensuite? A huge step up from what I had back in college. My words were meant to soothe, but my wife, still visibly tense, offered only a half smile in response. She exhaled slowly. "I know. Ellie will be fine once she finds her footing." She was already chatting away with that girl in the kitchen, the one with the slightly Asian features. Another sigh followed, as if she needed to convince herself of the truth in her own words. A couple of minutes passed in contemplative silence. The congestion in the parking lot was finally easing, though I didn't make a move just yet. Instead, I turned my attention to her. The worry still hadn't left her face. "Come on, cheer up," I coaxed. "Look at how well Ben adjusted to army life. 2 years ago, he was just an uncertain 18-year-old. Now he's confident, independent. Not that we see much of him these days. Too busy enjoying himself to bother visiting his parents." I let a chuckle slip before adding, "Unless, of course, he needs something, usually in the form of a loan that doesn't get repaid." Her lips twitched, but the melancholy remained. "Yes, I know. And now, it's just us. The nest is officially empty. You, me, and the rest of our lives." I reached for the sat-nav. "I need to set this up. That exit's one way, and I have no idea how to get back to the ring road from here. I'll turn it off once we hit the motorway." "Back to Brookside Court?" she murmured. 14 years in that house. I only remember because Ellie was 4 and Ben was 6 when we moved in." "It's a good house," I said, easing the car into reverse as the traffic cleared. "Always has been. Great place to raise a family. I was looking at the old treehouse the other day. Wouldn't take much to patch it up. Both of them spent so many hours up there." "Ellie especially," she noted, a hint of amusement creeping into her voice. "And not just for childhood games." That caught my attention. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Oh, just something I wasn't meant to see," she said, her tone light but teasing. "It was back in June, the shortest night of the year. I saw her sneaking up there with candles, a blanket, my guess. That was Jonathan's lucky night, probably his first time too. Ellie's a romantic, like you. She would have wanted it to be special." I sat with that for a moment, absorbing the weight of her words. Any father with a daughter knows it's inevitable, that someday, someone will be the first. And if he truly understands his daughter, he might even know exactly who. That didn't mean I needed the specifics. I cleared my throat, trying to mask the unease. "The shortest night, huh? There's probably a joke in there somewhere, one at Jonathan's expense." I paused, considering. "Do you think they'll still be together next year?" "I doubt it," she said, sounding certain. "She's here. He's all the way up in Durham. Too many new people, too many distractions. Long distance rarely works at their age." "Yeah, you're probably right." I followed the sat-nav's prompt and made a turn. "Shame. I like the kid." Silence settled over us again, stretching on as we merged onto the motorway. At first, it was comfortable, but after a while it felt heavier, as if the weight of the day's changes had finally caught up to us. I decided to steer the conversation elsewhere. "By the way, I saw that Dave and Linda finally sold number 12. When did that happen?" She sat up a little straighter, grateful for the distraction. "Last week, officially. Took them long enough. The buyers made a low offer, and it dragged out with endless negotiations. So they're finally off to Devon for that happy retirement. That house was on the market for nearly a year." I glanced at her. "Do you know what they got for it in the end? Ours is probably worth around the same, maybe a bit more, considering our bigger garden. Linda wouldn't say the exact amount, just that it was over 400,000. My guess, barely over." 400,000? I let out a low whistle. Not bad, considering the times we're in. There came that silence again, but this time tinged with strain. She was the first to break it, though. "Did you notice that Hannah Carson, from the End House number 1, has put her place on the market? The sign went up on Friday. She's only been there a couple of years." "Yeah, I saw it when I drove in Friday night. It's a 3-bedroom place, isn't it? She'll probably get close to what she paid for it." "Maybe," she whispered, then added, I always wondered why she bought it in the first place. She never really fitted in, and it is not like she's done much with the place. Linda and I were talking about it after the sign went up. The only real change we can see is she had the outside repainted, in the exact same color as before. Perhaps she liked the color, I ventured, half-heartedly defending Hannah. She ignored that and kept going. And then there is that weird gate she had fitted. Must have been about a year ago. It's in the side fence where the property backs onto Marston Road. Linda cannot believe nobody is able to see who goes and comes through that gate. Well, not that we can actually from our house. It is out of view round the bend, but what's the need to have this gate leading onto the patio direct when you've got quite an adequate entrance side already there by the side of the garage? I said nothing. There was more to come. Clearly my silence annoyed her. You must have seen it. You walk by every evening with the dog, and on your way back in after your little detour at the King's Head. She stopped, an edge in her voice. Yes, I know your secret. My chest contracted for a millisecond. I waited. You always say you're out walking, Toby, but I can smell the alcohol on your breath when you get home, and that's only on the nights I actually stay up to see you walk through the door. You come back so late. I let out a silent laugh. Well, sometimes I get caught up in things, the conversation, the atmosphere, the back and forth. And yes, I admit it, sometimes that includes a glass or two of wine. I knew it, she said triumphantly. You go to the King's Head. Why even bother hiding it? I never lied. I do take Toby for a walk, just not quite as far as you probably assumed. Honestly, I'm surprised one of your neighborhood gossip committee members hasn't spotted me and reported back to you. You all seem to decide things without actual facts, like whatever theories you've cooked up about Hannah. Well, we won't miss her, she said frankly. She never belonged here, and that lifestyle of hers, this isn't the kind of place for that. I scowled. What lifestyle? What precisely has she done to upset you? Or, better phrased, to upset the self-ordained high-minded council of Brookside Court? For starters, nobody has any idea what she actually does or where her money's coming from. She's obviously not hurting brand new Beamer, for one. That alone raises some questions. She owns Redwood Talent, that job agency in town, I said, setting the record straight. You know the one, right next to the bank. They specialize in executive placements, middle management, up to some pretty senior positions. It's a successful business. She spun to me. And how would you know that? Oh, after months of tireless investigation, I said dryly. Or, more realistically, I asked her. Richard Sutton introduced us at their summer party last year, probably 15 months ago now. You'd be amazed at how much you can learn by simply speaking to someone instead of gossiping about them behind their back. She dismissed the remark with a huff. Well, she's still a lesbian, and Linda and Beth are convinced she's pregnant. One of those militant types, I'd guess. The kind who insist on IVF like it's some kind of right, regardless of their lifestyle. I raised an eyebrow. And you came to this conclusion how exactly? I'd say it's far more likely she got pregnant the old-fashioned way. But back up, why are you so sure she's a lesbian? You never see a man visiting. The only person who regularly comes by is that dark-haired woman, probably a few years younger than her. And they're not exactly subtle. Kissing, hugging, right there on the front porch for all to see. It's distasteful. She shook her head. Her parents sometimes come too. I'm so sorry for them. Really sweet couple, and they have to stand there faking smiles and shaking hands, greeting their lesbian daughter and her girlfriend. Now she's pregnant? Those poor people. Sure, they love the grandbaby, but boy, I'd say can't help wishing it had been. Different. I let out a slow breath, trying to process the judgment and speculation so well mixed. And what exactly makes you think she's pregnant? She told you. Of course not, she scorned. She never speaks to me, but I see her, you don't. In the morning, when you take Toby out, you always turn right at the end of the close, toward the common. Not long after, she comes out for her run. She's in great shape, I'll give her that. Long legs, always in those little running shorts, hair in a ponytail, and her chest. Well, let's just say she could pass for a teenager. She shot me a look. Don't give me that. She runs the same route as you, which means she should pass you en route. I smirked. Oh, I've noticed. You missed out on one part. Her behind's also very impressive. She rolled her eyes. Typical to fixate on that. Now, you still never answered my question. What gave you the inkling that this lady was pregnant? She continued, her voice carrying in it the certainty of one who had unraveled a grand truth. Apparently, Beth saw her coming out of the health center on Trenton Road last Tuesday afternoon. And Tuesdays? They only handle prenatal appointments and classes. If she really is pregnant, it's still early. I've been keeping an eye out these past few mornings. Last Thursday, she came out after you'd already left for work, dressed head to toe in lycra, with a backpack. Looked like one of her cycling days. She does that about once a week instead of taking the car. Usually that outfit highlights her ridiculously flat stomach and, well, her figure in general. But on Thursday, both Linda and I swear there was a slight rounding to her belly and her chest looked fuller. It's not obvious yet, but we're convinced. Maybe 3 months along at most. Or maybe it's just wishful thinking on our part. She paused, then added, "She's what, 33? 34? So I suppose it could just be age catching up with her. There's always hope." I slowly exhaled and tried to piece together a different explanation. "Let's explore another possibility," I suggested. "What if the so-called girlfriend is, in fact, her little sister? Perhaps they are close, supportive in a perfectly normal manner. Maybe her parents are visiting because they love spending time with their daughters. And if she is pregnant, maybe they're truly glad about it. Maybe, just maybe she does have a partner, and they're both looking forward to it." She wasn't impressed. "Maybe, but I don't see how you'd know any more than Linda and I do." Then, with a shrug, she added, "Well, she's welcome to be pregnant. Doesn't change anything for us. We've done that part of life. It's just the two of us now." Her words stayed in the air, but by that time, my mind was down a different track altogether. "You know," I mused, "I wouldn't mind starting over, having another family. I loved those years when the kids were growing up. I could do it all again, happily. I'm only 44. Still got it in me. A second chance to get things right. Not that we did badly with Ben and Ellie. We should be proud of them. But raising kids in a house like ours, with that garden, watching them play and grow, that would be something." "Well, you can forget that," she said flatly. Then, as if the thought had triggered something else, she went on. "But it does remind me, I think it's time to get rid of the twin beds. We should go back to a double. It's been 3 years. Time to put things back the way they should be." I sighed, knowing where this was headed. "Sorry, not happening." She reacted in a split second. "Why not?" she demanded, clearly frustrated. I winced and ran a hand through my hair. 3 years ago, when I agreed to call off the divorce and come back, I laid down conditions. One of them was twin beds. No sharing until I decided otherwise. She blew out an impatient breath. "It's been 3 years. Surely we've moved past all that." I hesitated, studying her expression. Was she annoyed with me, permissive like a mother indulging the stubbornness of a child? Or was there something else there, some other signal, a hint of embarrassment, maybe, a wish to sweep everything under the rug and act like the past had never happened? Or could I dare hope, actual remorse? I couldn't tell. "No, we haven't," I said finally. "What exactly have you done to help me move forward, to help me forgive you? You've just been waiting, assuming I'd get over it on my own. You once told Linda that I was just having a hissy fit, and that it would pass with time." Her eyes flashed with indignation. "How do you know that?" "That you called my anger, my hurt, my humiliation a hissy fit?" I repeated. "Dave told me. He owes me a few favors, remember? He wouldn't lie to me." She glared, a sharp intake of breath crossing her arms. "He had no right to tell you that. I said it to Linda in confidence. Fine. If me words hurt you, I am sorry. I thought giving time to get over was the right thing to do, and you've had time. 3 years, to be exact." I gave a harsh laugh. "So you can confide in Linda, but Dave can't confide in me? He owes me, remember? If I hadn't pulled some strings and found him a good job after he was made redundant at 58, Linda would have had to sell up and move away long ago." She sighed, still clinging to a thin veneer of indignation. "Regardless, I still think it's time we put our marriage back together, fully." I breathed out, long and slow. When I agreed to cancel the divorce and come back, I was still drowning in anger and hurt. At the time, it was a very close decision: get divorced amicably, try to rebuild something with you, or, I let the words hang, then added, do something I'd regret. She looked away, silent. But beneath all that, if I'm being brutally honest, the one thing I wanted above everything else was for you to at least try to put our marriage back together. I loved you, and I couldn't think of my life without you and Ben and Ellie. And had you shown any real remorse, had you really, really regretted what you'd done with Philip Preston, then perhaps I would have met you halfway. Her eyes stayed on the road. But you never did, I added. All I wanted was that you show me you still wanted me, cared, that were truly sorry about how you'd hurt me, and it certainly took a year to make a dent. Right after that was when it slowly sunk in. You never made any effort. After which came the day the only thing one could do, well, one honored agreements taken. So, yeah, I'm still here. I managed, but by then I just started waiting for the day Ellie leaves home. The indignation flared back to life full force. What do you mean I never made any effort? She shot back. I did say I was sorry. It was a terrible mistake. I don't even know why I did it. It was just one of those things that happen sometimes. What was the point in dragging it out and going over it again and again? We just needed to get back to normal as soon as possible. I drew a considered breath, knowing full well I would be making a few harsh points. Best, in that light, to maintain it as calm and not have it become a shouting match of an argument. What's your favorite meal? She blinked quick at the utter change in subject. You know that chicken and lentil cacciatore thing I do, though there is a load more dishes I actually make that are just as dearly loved. Why? You make it beautifully, I acknowledged. You really are a great cook. Now, how often do you make it? She cocked her head slightly, wary of where this was going. I try not to make it too often so it stays special. Maybe once every couple of months. So, in the 3 years since I came back, you've made it around 18 times, give or take. Yes, I suppose that sounds about right. And what's my favorite meal? Lasagna, she said, already defensive. And before you start accusing me of anything, we've had lasagna probably just as many times as my cacciatore. That's true, I agreed. But how many times have you actually made it? Not just grabbed one from the supermarket and stuck it in the oven? You're an incredible cook. But in these 3 years, since you were busy being Philip's something else, how many times have you put in the effort to cook my favorite meal from scratch? Her face hardened. How dare you call me that? I am still your wife, and I deserve better than that. If my affair still causes you such mean, nasty thoughts, then that's your issue. But calling me names? That's just childish. She took a deep breath, composing herself. And as for your question, I suppose you already know the answer, don't you? I never made them from scratch, but I always bought good ones. And you ate them, didn't you? I didn't need to spend hours fussing over homemade lasagna when I had other things to do. I sighed and shook my head. Honestly, I wouldn't have brought it up. Margaret Preston was the first to call you a faithless, selfish woman. Her face darkened. She has no room to talk. She clung on to that man, never gave him any real freedom, wouldn't even let him have a proper divorce. And why were you even talking to her? I shrugged. 2 people licking their wounds, that's all. We started meeting up not long after your little secret with Philip came out. Still see her occasionally. In fact, last time was a couple of months ago. Met her new boyfriend, Brian Blackwell. Nice guy. Owns that big Mercedes dealership out on Oxford Road. I'd say she'll be Margaret Blackwell before long. She narrowed her eyes. How's that possible? She never let poor Philip have his divorce. I smirked. That's one way to put it. Though in some ways, I suppose she did refuse to divorce him. She loved him. Hung on through all his previous affairs. Never forgave him, but tolerated it. You, however, you were the final straw. Haven't spoken to poor Philip lately, have you? She faltered. He called me right after you found out about us, screamed at me, called me every name under the sun, then slammed the phone down. That was the last I heard from him, I swear. He's out of my life. Our lives. I shook my head. That wasn't what hurt him most. The breakup was inevitable after I confronted you. Besides, Margaret knew all along before me about you two. It was she who told me. Her face grimaced up. No, my guess is that his little outburst to you was about something else. What, for example? He had just found out the house he thought he had a share in wasn't in Margaret's name at all, but was held in some trust her father had established. Or maybe it was when Margaret's uncle, the company majority owner, fired him. She straightened. That's impossible. Philip owned the company. He told me that he had a big shareholding, and he told me they owned the house. She was the one who clung to him and made him miserable. I gave a mirthless chuckle. Not quite. Her father's brother owned 70% of the company. He was retired and let Philip play CEO, but the power was never his. The remaining 30%? Margaret's trust fund. When she did finally divorce him, he got half of their joint wealth, which turned out to be very little. Margaret thinks, but isn't certain, that he's now living in a shared flat somewhere in Newcastle. She kept silent, absorbing this revelation. As for Margaret, I finally said, she's still living in the house, took a seat on the company board, works well with the new CEO, and she bought herself a very nice Mercedes, which is how she met Brian in the first place. She told me all about her life with Philip. Not in the heat of the moment, not in the aftermath of betrayal. Initially, we were just two people trying to survive the mess we'd been left with. But about a year in, we both hit a phase where we needed to understand what went wrong, really analyze it. That's when she told me what kind of man Philip really was. She swallowed, her face unreadable. But he told me. I leaned back, really watching her now. What did she say? What did she tell you? I gave myself a little smile. This was going to be good. Margaret and Philip were never really compatible in the bedroom, I started. She knew that she probably had a lower drive than he did. She was fine with a couple of times a week, while Philip wanted it every night. That, however, was not the issue. She loved him, and therefore never refused him. How he was what the problem lay in. She liked passion. Sure, even rougher moments every now and then. She also wanted tenderness, closeness, something meaningful. Philip? He didn't have a thing for it. She was really wondering whether deep inside he knew it, sensed it. And instead of trying to change that, he looked elsewhere for his satisfaction. I stopped and looked sideways. She was staring at me with wide eyes, listening intently yet horrified. It devastated her, I continued. Still, she took the blame and thought she was not measuring up to his needs. So she let it be, though it was hurting her from inside. She did not say a word, sat frozen in position. After a few years of this, she begged him to stop, asked him to go to counseling. He refused, denied everything. Then Philip discovered the internet, spent his nights locked in his study, watching more and more extreme content. Margaret knew because he wasn't exactly careful about covering his tracks. I let that sink in before going on. And in time, it wasn't enough for him to merely watch. He wanted to act on it. He started expecting things from her that she wasn't comfortable with, things that left her feeling more like an object than a partner. She tried, thinking she could make it work, but eventually, she couldn't keep up. We tried something once or twice, remember? You hated it, refused to ever do it again. So you must know how she felt. I looked at her again. Or maybe, I added lightly, you just didn't like doing it with me. She looked away, guiltily. So I kept going. Margaret started noticing Philip was spending more and more money on his habits. The more unusual the request, the higher the cost. Eventually, she put a stop to it, took control of their finances. After all, it was her money. That's when Philip moved on to other women, when he couldn't afford professionals anymore. And Margaret went back to looking the other way. It was easier. She still had some trace of love for him. And she knew that a divorce would leave him with next to nothing. She didn't want to do that to him. I exhaled slowly before delivering the next part. But back then, at least, he went after younger women in their early 20s, single, old enough to make their own choices. If they later regretted it, they could chalk it up to being young and foolish. But as it wore on, they stopped tolerating his requirements. So on he moved to slightly older women divorcees in their 30s. Still single, still independent. That was easier for Margaret to stomach, though it humiliated her. These weren't some passing fling anymore. These were serious relationships, ones that actually had a place they might go to. I turned my head slightly, voice dropping as I delivered the blow. And then you came along, a married woman, a mother of 2, and, in Margaret's words, a miserable, unfaithful woman with no regard for her family. You weren't some lonely divorcee. You weren't some wide-eyed 20-year-old. You were willing to throw away your husband, your kids, your life, just to entertain Philip's whims. I didn't have to look at her to know the effect of my words. Her body had gone rigid. She turned her face away from me, but in the reflection of the car window, I could see the tears slipping down her cheeks. But she said nothing. Nothing to say? I finally asked. That's not like you. Her voice was low. It wasn't like that, she insisted. He wasn't as bad as you're making him sound. And besides, I wanted to stop it. I was going to break it off. But you found out first. I wasn't given a chance. Ah, there it was. The righteousness creeping back in. My guess, I said, my tone almost casual, It was going exactly the way Margaret said. That's why you wanted out. Not because of me, not because of love, because you were starting to realize exactly what you'd gotten yourself into. He started off as the charming businessman, the neglected husband, romantic, attentive, but then he pushed, slowly, more and more. Wanted you to be different, less reserved, more submissive. And he started treating you differently, didn't he? The way he spoke to you changed. The way he acted toward you shifted. Until suddenly, you weren't some special woman in his life. You were just another person he wanted to control. Her lips parted, but she didn't say a word. You wanted out, I said matter-of-factly. Not because you wanted me back, because you realized you couldn't keep being his. She swallowed hard. I wanted our life back. I wanted you back. I let the silence fall between us for a long moment, because what I didn't hear in her words was any regret at having hurt me. No real apology. No real acknowledgement of guilt. Just a woman who'd lost control of something she thought she could handle. Finally, I spoke again, keeping my voice even. When I agreed to drop the divorce and come home, we made a reconciliation agreement. Several conditions were laid out. You know them, you agreed to them. Though I suspect you were only doing what was necessary to get your life back on track. I shook my head. The most important of those conditions was that we would go to counseling, to actually work on fixing things. But that didn't last long, did it? Her chin rose. He was a phony, she snapped. All he wanted was for me to sit there and relive everything I did with Philip. That was private. You didn't need to hear all that. And he certainly didn't. So after only 4 sessions, you walked away, I said, my tone calm but firm. What the counselor was trying to do was bring honesty into our relationship. There couldn't be any secrets if we were going to have a real chance. But I don't think you left because of his approach. I think you were afraid of your own choices, of what you might have to admit. You didn't want to tell me that you had done things with Philip that you had refused me for years, and that's where you got it wrong. I glanced at her, watching as the tears streamed down her face. She was unraveling, and yet I wasn't finished. You should have trusted me more, I continued. I know that role-playing, exploring different things together, all of that can be a natural and fulfilling part of intimacy, with the right person. If you had been open with me, maybe it would have been difficult at first, but at least it would have been a step towards something better for us. She wiped her eyes and looked up. But you did come to me, she said quietly. We have been together every week. Maybe if we moved back to a double bed, we could build on that. But I'm not playing a role for you. I don't like that. I don't enjoy it. But you did it for Philip, I countered, pausing to let that settle. Let's be honest here. I started climbing into your bed once a week out of habit, but it was never really about reconnecting, was it? I'd be back in my own bed within 15 minutes, and I kept doing it for a couple of reasons. First, because as I started to recover from everything, I still had needs and you were there. But more importantly, I had hoped that maybe, just maybe, it would lead to something better. That we'd talk. That we'd find some closeness again. That you'd want to show me you cared about me and what I had been through. I exhaled, shaking my head. But you never did. And now I think I do it more out of routine. And because you expect it. I've just been keeping things steady. Keeping things from collapsing. I glanced at her again, but she was staring out the window, lost in her thoughts. Still, I pressed on, unsure if she was even listening. You've had 3 years to show me that you love me, that you want me as more than just a provider or someone to lean on. Have you ever worn anything special for me? The things you once wore for him? I paused, already knowing the answer. No, you refused counseling, and beyond that, you've done nothing to rebuild what we lost. She turned back, her eyes flashing. I wouldn't feel comfortable wearing those things for you, she said stiffly. They're not me. They never were. I don't even know why I bought them in the first place. I gave a small, humorless laugh. Yes, I have noticed you've put on weight. For Philip, you slimmed down. You put in the effort. You took care of how you looked. And then, once I came back, you settled into your comfort zone and waited for my hissy fit to pass. Did it ever cross your mind that maybe I might have wanted that same effort? That maybe I liked how you looked back then? I shook my head. If it did, it was a passing thought at best. It never counted for much. I let the silence settle as I exited the motorway and maneuvered through the roundabout, taking us onto the familiar roads that led home. When we were back on local streets, I added, But I'll be fair. You did honor some of our agreement. You let me get Rocky. I know you never liked the idea of having a dog, but I do. And he's changed my life. Those morning and evening walks, they've been good for me. She let out a frustrated breath. You and that dog, she muttered. How am I supposed to fix our marriage when you're always out walking Rocky? When we got him, they said he'd only need one good walk a day, but you take him out twice. I don't even know why. I smiled to myself. We only got Rocky a little over a year ago, so he wasn't stopping you from fixing anything for the first 2 years. Walking him wasn't the problem. The problem was your refusal to talk. To admit what you did was serious. You wanted to shove your betrayal into a dark corner and pretend it never happened. My smile faded. But that was never going to be enough. And I'm sorry, but we ran out of time a long time ago. There's no saving this. You've had plenty of chances to bring this marriage back to life, but instead, you just waited, assumed that if you ignored it, things would magically get better. They haven't. She turned to me sharply, finally hearing the finality in my voice. What do you mean? I didn't hesitate. I resigned from my job on Friday, I said simply. That's a start. Her expression twisted in shock. But we need that money. And what about your pension? What are you even going to do? I let out a slow breath. When we get home, I'll be finishing my packing. And then I'm leaving. Don't worry. I'll take Rocky with me. You won't have to deal with him anymore. I also met with my solicitor on Friday to restart the divorce. You'll get the paperwork soon. It's all as agreed in our reconciliation contract, so you shouldn't have any trouble with it. I've already packed everything I need from my office. The only thing left is my clothes. Her breathing was unsteady now, her mind racing. What do you mean, it's all as agreed? That was 3 years ago. We've been together for 3 years. You can't just walk out now. I kept my eyes on the road. Oh yes, I can, and I will. I took a steadying breath and continued. The agreement was clear. I would come back, and we would maintain a family home for 3 years, or until our children left. Well, Ellie has left, and it's been over 3 years. You agreed that during this time, you would actively try to rebuild our marriage. You didn't. You agreed that we would get a dog. We did. You agreed that we would have separate beds until both of us wanted to return to a shared one. I never did. You agreed to counseling, but you ended it after 4 sessions. And finally, we agreed that if, after all that, I still wanted a divorce, I could have one, based on the financial settlement we outlined. I turned onto our street, finally saying the words that had been lingering in my mind for years. I do, and I will honor that settlement. Her voice was laced with disbelief. But we've been happy these last few years. Why would you want to leave? We have a comfortable life. Why change it? I sighed, keeping my eyes on the road. I'm glad you've been happy. I really am. But I wasn't. I was just making the best of a bad situation. There was no point in complaining, getting angry, or letting bitterness take over. You were simply being you. So I tried to make it work. And I think, in some ways, I did. We should at least be proud that we held things together for the sake of the kids. She exhaled sharply, struggling to grasp what was happening. But where will you go? What will you do? Where will you live? All right, let's lay it out, I said, keeping my tone even. It's inevitable that the house will have to be sold. You'll get half of what it's worth. Based on the recent sale of Ben and Linda's place, you're probably looking at a little over $200,000, minus your share of what's left on the mortgage. By my estimate, that still leaves you with about $150,000. Enough to help you move forward. I could feel her stiffen beside me. But remember, I continued, you'll only be getting alimony for 6 months, and there's no claim on my pension. That was part of the agreement. That being said, I'd rather buy you out of your share of the house if possible. I like living in the close. Now that Linda is leaving, it's probably going to be a better place for me, and the house suits what I see as my future. Her frustration boiled over. For heaven's sake, wake up! How do you plan on paying for that if you don't even have a job? Who said I don't have a job? I replied, glancing at her. I'm moving into interim management. My first assignment is covering for a senior business manager while she's on maternity leave. It'll be different from what I've been doing, but she'll be around for the first couple of months to get me up to speed. She scoffed. That won't last forever. Maternity leave means she'll be back in 6 months, maybe a year. That's the thing, I said with a small smile. I get the feeling she won't be coming back full time. It's her first child, and she wants another. So, chances are, I'll be stepping into more of a long-term job share with her. And honestly, I think I'm going to enjoy it. Desperation was creeping into her voice. But where will you go? Why not at least stay? I promise I'll try to do better. I shook my head. Oh, I'm not leaving town. I plan to stay close. Maybe closer than you think. And suddenly, I saw it. The moment she truly started waking up to reality. Please give me a chance, she whispered. Please don't do this to me. We can go to counseling if that's what you want. If that's what it takes. Her voice cracked. There's nothing to hide anymore. I exhaled slowly. I'm sorry, I said, meaning it. But you sound exactly like you did 3 years ago. And I did give you a chance. Not again. But look, we still have our memories. What we had before you decided to wander off to Philip was special. And we can still be friends if you want. We still have Ben and Ellie. I turned onto our street. But I am moving on with my life. Her hands clenched into fists on her lap. But if we went to counseling, we could finally talk about everything. Why I had the affair. Why I refused to talk about it. Why, apparently I haven't done enough to make you want to stay. Don't you want to know those things? We could fix this, not just for you, for both of us. I pulled into the driveway, staring at the house for a long moment before answering. Oh, I wanted those answers once, I admitted. I used to lie awake at night, needing to understand why. But it became clear you weren't going to tell me. No matter how much I struggled with the pain, the humiliation, the betrayal, I turned to face her. Every time I tried to bring it up, tried to work through what happened, you'd shut it down. Get out of the conversation as fast as you could. Over time, I accepted that you were just who you were. I reached for the door handle. Now, it doesn't matter anymore. I've moved on. And, to be honest, I met her eyes. You don't interest me. She flinched like I had struck her. That's a horrible thing to say. I'm your wife. I nodded slowly. Not for much longer, and you need to move on too. Her voice cracked. But what do you expect me to do? I shrugged. Well, I suppose you'll have to get a job. The house money and that little bit of alimony will get you through the transition. But after that, it's up to you. She sighed, shaking her head. I guess I'll have to go back to accountancy. It's what I did before I gave it up to have Ben. I suppressed a laugh as I stepped out of the car. I wouldn't, I said lightly. I really wouldn't. Her eyes narrowed. Why not? I turned to her, a smirk tugging at my lips. Because from what I've seen, I said, you're not very good at adding 2 and 2.